Justice Secretary Dominic Raab standing in for the Prime Minister today at PMQs while Boris Johnson attends the NATO summit in Madrid. Defence spending, Ukraine, the prospect of another Scottish referendum and, of course, the rising cost of living are all possible lines of questioning for Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner in the Commons. While we're joined now by the former Cabinet Minister and Conservative MP Theresa Villiers, also joined by Lucy Powell, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Support. And we're joined by Richard Thomson, the SNP spokesperson for Northern Ireland. Welcome to you all as we head towards the battle of the deputies at 12 o'clock today. Let's start with defence spending. Theresa Villiers, to you first. We've heard, of course, Ben Wallace today talking for a greater investment in the UK Armed Forces past 2024. Do you support his call for more cash for the UK Armed Forces?
I certainly hope in due course defence spending will continue to rise, given the security situation. But I would emphasise that it's been increased substantially. It's at its highest level ever. And that demonstrates the government's very strong commitment to our security and to supporting Ukraine as well.
So you don't believe it's necessary, do you?
I would like to see defence spending continue to rise in the future. I think we have to be cautious about what we can do right away because of the state of the public finances. We do need to take a careful approach while we rebuild the public finances after the COVID emergency, because we also, of course, have to balance the need to get people's taxes down.
Lucy Powell, let's come to you now. Just what is Labour's position then on defence spending? I mean, if you were in power, would you increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP?
Well, look, all democracies have to respond to new threats, and we're clearly seeing new threats now to European security and other global threats. And so any government, like the Labour government did after the 9/11 attacks, has to respond to that, and the Labour government then increased defence spending in real terms by more than it had for 2 decades or more prior to that. So what we would do, I mean, obviously we don't have access to all of the intelligence and military information we would need to make an assessment about that. What we would do is immediately do a strategic defence review if we were elected to government. And that's what we think the government today should be doing now, so that our defence budget can match the needs and the threats that we now face today, which are evolving and changing very quickly. And of course, with the situation in Ukraine as it is, you know, defence spending is needed to match what we're doing over there in supporting the Ukrainian government.
And Richard, let's bring you in now. SNP, of course, long been against Trident nuclear weapons, for example. So when it comes to the issue of defence spending and a big cash injection, does this go against the grain for you?
Not necessarily. I think you need the defence capabilities that you need, and for a long time it was said of the UK's military that what we needed we didn't have, and much of the equipment that we had we didn't need. But I think it's a very fair point to make that if we were not spending hundreds of billions of pounds on Trident, there might be less pressure overall on the defence budget. But I think we do need to respond to the emerging global situation as it is. It's right that all NATO countries should be at least hitting that 2% target for defence spending in NATO. It's a bit of a cheat, I think, to try, as the Prime Minister is, to incorporate the military aid that's going to Ukraine and roll it in on top of that 2% figure to say that we're doing more than we are. But I think we also need to recognise that the threats that we're facing to our national security also come in the form of cyber threats and threats and disinformation and misinformation. And I think it's very, very important to make sure that we're thoroughly resilient in all the spheres where international conflict might take place.
Theresa Villiers, let's bring you back in. I mean, isn't Ben Wallace undermining Boris Johnson somewhat? Because Boris Johnson's, of course, at the NATO summit in Madrid today. He's telling other NATO members that they've got to boost their own defence spending when it comes to NATO. And yet he's not got his own house in order when it comes to, you know, Ben Wallace asking for more money for the UK armed forces.
Well, I think Ben Wallace was pretty clear on his media round this morning that there isn't a difference of view between him and the Prime Minister. You know, they both want to see defence spending rise in due course. And I would emphasise that we are meeting our NATO commitments. We're one of the limited number of countries in the alliance that actually does that.
So you think Boris Johnson will honour that? You think Boris Johnson will come up with an extra £4 billion, will increase defence spending above inflation? You think he will do that?
We're meeting our NATO commitments. I mean, with inflation running at 10%, it's really difficult for defence spending to keep pace with that.
So that sounds like a no.
But we are continuing to meet our NATO commitments under the alliance, and that is crucial. And I'm pleased that the Prime Minister is urging other countries to do that, because for too long there are many countries in NATO which haven't pulled their weight. We've seen with the grave threats to the security situation as a result of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, that now it's time for other countries to step up and meet their commitments on defence spending too.
OK, so defence spending likely to come up in PMQs. I'll tell you another issue that's more than likely to come up is the issue of Scottish independence. Richard Thomson, let's come to you on this. Of course, we heard from Nicola Sturgeon yesterday raising the prospect of Indyref 2 in October of next year. I mean, given that you had a once-in-a-generation referendum some 9 years ago, it's going to be a tall order to secure another one, isn't it?
Oh, no, I think the circumstances have changed mightily since then because of Brexit. You might recall that the Scottish National Party in its 2016 manifesto for the Scottish Parliament said it reserved the right to hold a referendum if there was a significant change in opinion or a material change in circumstance, and gave that specific material change in circumstance as the case of Scotland being dragged out of the European Union against its will as a result of a Brexit referendum. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So I think it's quite reasonable that the people in Scotland who are sovereign should have the right to decide whether or not, in light of all we've experienced since then, whether or not we wish to remain in the the United Kingdom, or whether we wish to become independent and rejoin the European Union. And what the First Minister of Scotland announced yesterday was a means by which we would seek to do that. Best route is for an agreement, as was the case previously, between Edinburgh and London on how to do that. But in the event that the Prime Minister keeps saying now is not the time, without ever actually saying what the time is to have the legal basis for a referendum tested in the Supreme Court, and that is the quickest and cleanest way to proceed in the event that we can't get an agreement with the UK government on this.
Lucy, let's come to you now. We had Lisa Nandy, the Levelling Up Secretary, talking to Sky News this morning. She says Nicola Sturgeon has a brass neck for asking for another referendum. Is she right?
I think she is, because there are many more serious issues facing Scotland right now that she is responsible for, that she has the powers to do quite a lot about. You know, there are 1 in 8 people in Scotland, 1 in 8 people currently on the NHS waiting list, which are getting worse, not better. There are serious issues with education, transport, and of course we're facing this unprecedented, really unprecedented cost of living crisis right now, which all governments of the UK should be unrelenting in focusing on, because that's what most Scottish people, as is most Mancunians, as most people across the country are primarily concerned with right now. So when we had a once-in-a-generation vote only a few years ago, I do think this is a lot more about Nicola Sturgeon trying to make herself relevant towards the next general election than it is about meeting the needs of Scottish people in their everyday lives. OK,
let's bring Richard back in. You're shaking your head, as you would expect, but 700,000 people on a waiting list in Scotland, is that more of a priority?
Well, I think it's possible for a competent government to do more than one thing and address more than one issue at once.
And are you doing that?
Lucy's speaking, absolutely. And the way Lucy's speaking, you would almost be forgiven for thinking there were no such things as hospital waiting lists in England. But look, the way that you deal, it's not about independence in and of itself for its own sake. We argue for independence as a means of improving the lot of everybody who makes their life in Scotland. And it's only by matching up the full powers of an independent country that you can really begin to get get to grips with some of the issues we're seeing, like the cost of living crisis, like building back a fairer and better society and a more equitable society from the pandemic, and tackling some of the systemic inequalities that there are in our country. So for me, it's about building a country where we're restricted only by the limits of our own choices, our own imagination and our very own considerable resources. And it's integral to every single thing that Lucy has mentioned.
Briefly to Teresa Villiers, just want to get you a comment. Sorry, I want to go to Teresa Villiers.
Back on that.
OK, very, very briefly.
Well, look, I mean, it's an incredibly divisive debate, and the SNP are fully aware of that. The country is divided on this issue, and it's going to cause a huge amount of division just at a time the country needs to be pulling together and dealing with these incredibly serious issues, which they have powers and responsibility to do something about, but they are not doing. So they say they can do more things.
I want to give Teresa Villiers a quick comment. I must give Teresa Villiers a quick chance to have a very, very quick comment on Indyref 2, the possibility. Very quickly, please.
Our Union of Four Nations makes us all better off and stronger together. The COVID emergency showed that because of the strength of the economic package we were able to give to all citizens across the United Kingdom. And so I think it's entirely wrong to kick off a debate about division and separation yet again when we've got so many big challenges to face. Not only inflation, not only the security situation, but of course tackling climate change and protecting our environment. All of these will not be helped by years of bitter wrangling over a separation referendum for Scotland.
We have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Teresa Villiers, Lucy Powell and Richard Thomson, thank you very much for talking to us on Sky News ahead of PMQs. Let's bring in our Deputy Political